Welcome to the Soul Archaeology podcast, a space for connection, resonance, witnessing, and learning. Together we'll harvest medicine from the spiral of life, sharing conversations with other embodied humans who have navigated their own initiations and found alignment with their true soul essence. With weekly astrology, energy updates, embodied conversation, and channeled teachings, this is a space for you to land and find resonance with the spiral of your own soul. Hello, welcome back to Soul Archaeology. Happy winter solstice. That was such a beautiful natural pause. It's so helpful to have these seasonal demarcation points where we get to really acknowledge the change of seasons. We get to deepen into our natural rhythms and practices that align with the seasons, because it's such an important part of being human, especially in this incredibly fast-paced, electric, technological framework that really kind of lends itself to an environment that breeds disconnection from the earth, from self, from our bodies, from time, from the way that nature's rhythms really help to align us. And when we're able to really honor these points, these solstice or equinox points, we're able to reconnect with the earth and the land in a way that is so important to our physiology. If we think back, our ancestors, that's how they tracked time. And all of our ancestors, tracing them back to all of the different cultures, had to align with the land. They had to align with the earth. They had no choice but to resource Earth's wisdom. And now in our world with Apple Watches and the strength of this technological matrix that we live within, which essentially pulls us out of our natural wisdom, the wisdom of the earth, the wisdom of the seasons, the wisdom of the cycles. And I notice the further away I have traveled from the earth throughout my lifetime, the more confused I've been around the waves of awakening and evolution and change that are so natural. They're so naturally embedded in the cycles of nature and the seasons. The earth's wisdom holds so much nutritional content that we need to really understand why there are so many ebbs and flows within this life, that we are biological beings experiencing a rapid expansion of consciousness, but that we still must go through these natural ebbs and flows, these cycles, these rhythms of contraction and expansion in order to grow in the ways we are meant to within this lifetime. I was talking to some friends over the weekend. We were on a hike and just kind of speaking to the wild and rapid rate at which we are growing and evolving specifically over the last 5 to 10 years. And I often get this question from people, especially clients and in sessions, and even when we're just, talking with friends, it's, when will it get easier? And it's such an interesting question because I think it is very evident that the last 5 years especially have progressed in their evolutionary pressure. We're experiencing so much more pressure to expand, to grow, to evolve. But what I see that really is that we're experiencing more light entering the planet. And light is consciousness. And this light that's pouring in is really asking for us to tend to the density held within our cells, the density held within our psyche, the density held within our auric field. And this density is trauma. It's memories from the past. It's imprinting from our ancestors that we're ready to release and let go of within this lifetime. And so the more light that pours in, the more consciousness, the more awakening that occurs, the more we have to tend to, the more we have to sit with, to sift through, to be with, to tend to acknowledge, to attune to. And when we do that, we begin to build more resilience, more confidence, more love and compassion. The spaces that were holding density now can hold more light, more opportunity for love, and specifically unconditional love. So we sort of go through these contraction periods to tend to what's within us so that we can expand. We can expand the spaces to hold more love, more compassion, more grace. And I don't know that that ever slows down for the rest of our lifetimes within this incarnation. But what can occur is that our systems can become more resilient. They can build more capacity to hold more, to be with these experiences, these memories, these traumas for a longer period of time, to allow them to fully dissolve. So as the pressure builds, we have these different waves where things feel more intense and then things are calm. And this week in particular is one of those wave periods. Of course, we were in the holiday season. We're fully immersed in this portal of time where we are seeing potentially family, friends. We are shifting our natural rhythm. And this, of course, coincides with solstice. It coincides with the shifting and changing of seasons. We begin to shift and change our practices, our rituals, our routines. We're asked to go more inward, to visit the spaces and places within us that hold these tension patterns, these stagnation points, or this trauma, this density we're talking about. And luckily, being in these time points where we are around family, we are experiencing anniversaries of other holidays, other experiences, so much subconscious material comes up during the holiday season. Just being around family and friends from the past, maybe you're visiting people or you're around people you don't see all the time. People who really represent or hold the framework for what has been, who you were in the past. Oftentimes our childhood conditioning. And when that occurs, the subconscious gets activated and it brings you to the points as if it were happening right now. So there's so much unconscious material that comes up. And this week is astrologically pretty charged as well. On Christmas Eve, on December 24th, we have the second Saturn-Jupiter square. The first one was on August 19th of 2024. This is the second. We'll have another in June of 2025. And on the 26th of December, we have Mercury forming an opposition with Jupiter, which is retrograde, and also squaring Saturn. So because Jupiter and Saturn are already squaring each other, Mercury moves into an opposition to Jupiter and a square to Saturn. So it forms a T-square, or a pressure configuration that is pushing material up and forward for us to process, to be with, to see, to witness. This week holds a lot of energy around Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn in particular. And then on the 27th, we have Venus squaring Uranus. Venus in Aquarius squaring or forming a pressure aspect to Uranus, which is currently retrograde in Taurus. On December 30th, we have the second new moon of the month. It's a new moon in Capricorn. And I'll be talking about that in the next episode since it will come out on the new moon day. But this week, I'm really focusing on this Jupiter-Saturn squaring configuration. This is really a very significant point in time. Jupiter and Saturn create 20-year cycles together. They conjoin every 20 years. So every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn meet in the sky. Between that time, they either form, every 5 years, they form either a squaring configuration or an opposition. So 5 years from the beginning of a 20-year cycle, Jupiter and Saturn square each other. 5 years later, they oppose each other. And 5 years later, they square each other again. 5 years later, they conjoin. So it's this journey that Jupiter and Saturn do together. They're the two largest planets. They conjoined in December of 2020 at 0 degrees Aquarius. So they began this dance, this new chapter together, sifting and sorting through these Aquarian themes. Jupiter and Saturn are navigating a fixed journey together. So they're working to help us break through patterning, systems, beliefs from the past. So 4 years ago, on December 21st, 2020, we had Jupiter and Saturn, the two largest planets in the sky, conjoining together. 4 years later, we have the first squaring that occurred on August 19th, now on December 24th, and then again next June. And Saturn demarcates a limit or a boundary. Jupiter seeks to expand past it. It's always looking to grow. Saturn is working to limit or provide a boundary or a structure around something. We'll see inner themes around beliefs, values, safety, fear, procrastination, rushing into things, because Jupiter in Gemini has a tendency to do that. Jupiter expands anything it touches. It's really called the Great Benefic Planet. It's about luck, abundance, expansion, growth, spirituality, opportunity. Saturn represents, like I said, structure, limits, responsibility, and maturity. Jupiter in Gemini wants to gather information, collect data, share wisdom. Saturn in Pisces really asks us to create boundaries around our spiritual practices and our mystical experiences. This squaring really asks us, how do we structure our expanding awareness? How can we create spiritual practices and routines that facilitate learning and growth in a way that is practical, rooted, and grounded? Our consciousness is expanding so rapidly. How can we root that new wisdom? How can we bring it through our bodies, into our bones, our blood, our tissues, root and ground it into the earth so that it can be shared with the rest of the world in a way that's practical and digestible? Jupiter being in retrograde currently is really having us review what we thought we knew. Jupiter and Gemini can be very scattered. It can be too much information, too much stimulation. This time is asking for us to visit. Where do we need to know something? Where do we need clarity and truth and certainty? And where do we need just to trust? I've talked a lot about this on the podcast the last few episodes. Where can we just surrender to the not knowing, the unknown? It's really important to note that these two planets hold very different energy. Jupiter is expanding always. It's always looking to grow. It's always looking to push past limits or boundaries. Saturn is looking to contain. It's looking to organize, to structure, to create boxes and boundaries so that we may understand and digest, so that we may mature and grow through discipline, through structure, through organization, through ritual, through practice. So this is a tension point, especially because they're squaring one another. It's a checkpoint to really visit where you aren't taking action, or maybe where you're spinning out. This transit will really open doorways and pathways to expand into higher consciousness, opening up mental blocks since Mercury is in the mix as well. It's asking for us to sort and sift through what we know, what we believe to be true, and to just check in on it. Can you transcend the gridlocks? Even the gridlocks of your own mind, the gridlocks of your own biases, the gridlocks of your own beliefs rooted in fear. Saturn wants us to mature and ripen through these thresholds. That's why when we have a Saturn return, we're asked to go through these trial and testing periods to move through challenges in a new way, to mature and ripen through them. And in order to do that, we have to transmute fear. We have to tend to the fear that exists within us that is afraid. There's so much opportunity within this transit, within this week, to notice where we're holding fear, where we are pulling from information and data from the past, and to mature through it, to ripen through it, to expand past these walls, limits, boundaries that we hold ourselves within, because we're really the only ones holding ourselves back. We're the only ones able to unlock the cages we've placed ourselves within. No one can save us. And I think that's so much of what this Jupiter-Saturn dance is doing, is it's showing us that we are the ones that hold the keys. And we have to be radically honest with ourselves in order to release ourselves from these grips, from these binds. It's important to remember we're still somewhat in, or sort of moving out of, the underworld of Mercury. We're still navigating Mercury's shadow. So this is surfacing our belief systems, our mental blocks, communications, relationships, our self-confidence. This is a revolutionary time. And I've noticed within myself, just kind of being back with family and seeing all the old pieces and parts surface, that when you do this work of sort of being with and tending to the roots and patterns when you're alone, when you're doing your deep inner work, when you enter into the relationships or the frameworks that created the patterning or created the programs or the conditioning, it's very likely they will surface again. Now, this doesn't mean that they have to surface in the same way, that they have to take hold of you or hijack you in the same way. For me, what it's done is it's allowed me to have a lot more space between the activation and the response. So I get to choose how I respond in that moment. And I think that's really the goal of this growth work, is to just notice where these programs lie, where these activations occur, and to create more space for us to choose how we'd like to respond to it. There will be wounds within this lifetime that we don't fully transmute, but we can befriend them and we can tend to them enough that they soften. And with this Jupiter-Saturn energy, it's giving us an opportunity to break down some of the walls and barriers within our psyche, to liberate ourselves from the restraints. But it can also bring up a lot of frustration and anger even around where and how we feel blocked, where we feel out of our power or controlled by our circumstances. One of the shadow aspects of Saturn in Pisces is victim consciousness. Where are you, even very subtly, playing the victim within your life? Where do you feel hopeless, helpless, out of your power? Like I said, Jupiter and Saturn met at 0 degrees Aquarius on December 21st, 2020, which is interesting because we've been navigating that 0 degrees Aquarius point over the last few years with Pluto moving back and forth over that space. Pluto's ingress into Aquarius has been a dance over the last few years. And this Jupiter-Saturn cycle, this 20-year cycle they began in 2020, will continue throughout Pluto's journey through Aquarius. So there's this correlation. There's this assistance that Jupiter and Saturn are giving to Pluto's journey through Aquarius over the next 20 years. And this is the first checkpoint. They're providing an opportunity for us to review how we've been tending to and responding to the seeds that we planted in December of 2020, the wishes that we planted for this new cycle. Because Pluto's bringing up so much unconscious material and it's giving us a lot of evolutionary assistance to grow and evolve in certain ways, individually and collectively. Jupiter and Saturn together are both giving us an opportunity to break down the walls and barriers within our psyche. the walls and barriers within our systems, our external and internal systems, to pace ourselves, to bring practicality, restriction, rationale to this expansion process. I always feel that Saturn sort of roots and grounds Jupiter, because Jupiter is the higher mind, it's consciousness, it's spirituality, it's what's beyond this physical plane. And Saturn is very much connected to this physical plane. It's more like lead. It kind of holds us and roots and grounds us. And we need both of these as we move through this physical incarnation. We need to be rooted and grounded into the physical. We need to know and understand how to navigate the material plane as beings who are evolving their consciousness as well. So Saturn can bring a sobering sort of effect to this Jupiter-Saturn square, but it can be super helpful. So I always say that Saturn is not the enemy. It can feel restrictive and tight and tense sometimes, but it's asking for us to, in many ways, tend to the physical, tend to what's here right now in front of us, to not get lost in the noise, lost in the data, the information, the overstimulation that's occurring in this technological matrix we live within, but to sort through it and to bring it through our own truth channel to see what resonates and what doesn't. And this is part of what Saturn is doing in Pisces as well, as it's sobering us in many ways. It's not stripping us of our spiritual practices, our spiritual connections, but it's bringing it into a space of grounding. How can we apply these beliefs and these experiences to daily life? I always think that, especially during a very Saturnian time, returning to our rituals and practices, our devotion, is so important. What are you tending to? What are you pouring your energy, time, focus into? This is where you're placing your devotion. Are you devoted to the past, to old grudges, resentments, fears? Or are you devoted to presence, to creating and sustaining and fortifying truth, peace? And this brings us back to the beginning when I talked about how we cultivate peace, knowing that this process will continue throughout our lifetime, that things won't necessarily become easier, but we get to control how we respond to it. And I think part of it is really being able to harvest peace in the present moment, even when there's chaos. How can you condition your nervous system to find peace and find safety, even when there's chaos? This time period, 4 years after this first connection between Jupiter and Saturn, is a checkpoint. It represents the first major challenges or crises point in the cycle that began in 2020. It really tests how we've developed since the conjunction and asks us to integrate wisdom with practicality. We're really being tested around the seeds and intentions that we planted in December of 2020. So think back to that time. There were themes around expression, individuality, freedom, autonomy, agency, discernment, individuality, ethics, morals, values. This is very tied to even our democracy here in the US and democracy collectively across the globe. We are in the oldest democracy here in the US. What does that look like? Are we still operating from that space? We will see a huge overhaul of the democracies across the globe, I think, over the next 20 years with Pluto being in Aquarius. And this time really asks for us to mature, Saturn, our approaches to learning and sharing wisdom, which is Jupiter, while maintaining connection to our spiritual truth through communication, through how we connect with and communicate with the world. Like I said, we have this squaring happening at 14 degrees of Gemini and Pisces on December 24th. We have another square, the last square within this cycle, on June 15th of 2025 at 1 degree of Cancer and Aries. So that's when Saturn moves into Aries, Jupiter moves into Cancer, and we have the first square connected to this point. The other piece that this week is bringing forward is Venus squaring Uranus. And Venus is in Aquarius. Uranus is retrograde in Taurus. And they're squaring each other at 23 degrees in the sky. Venus represents values, relationships, beauty. In Aquarius, it values individuality, freedom. It seeks connection through innovation, honors the uniqueness in relationships, and really values collective ideals, humanitarian ideals. It really values the group. I notice a lot of Venus and Aquarius people and Venus and Gemini people have a lot of friends. They really value interpersonal relationships in that way, friendships, groups, collectives, communities, even sometimes over intimate one-on-one relationships. With Uranus and Taurus, it's currently retrograde. It's really reviewing and revolutionizing our relationship with the material world, which is Taurus. Our resources, our values, and our sense of security and safety within the material world, within our bodies. Uranus is revolution, it's change. In the rooted earth sign of Taurus, it's upheaval, uprooting. So this week we could have some unexpected breakthroughs in relationship patterns, really examining our need for freedom and our need for intimacy, insights and revelations around our values, liberation from the old ways of relating, the old ways we relate to others and our resources. And it can really help us break free from any limiting relationship structures, any limiting beliefs, any old programs or patterns that are forming our relationships right now. It can also really help us befriend change, how we find stability through change. So this week really brings up the material that is holding us in old patterning, where we feel stuck, where we feel hopeless, where we feel out of control or out of our power. It brings us to these spaces and places that remain stuck so that we can liberate ourselves. Jupiter, Aquarius, Uranus, asking for expansion, liberation, growth, and Saturn really rooting and grounding us, asking for us to move with intention, awareness, practicality. So it's this push and pull energy all week. Layering that with the holiday season, it can be quite a lot to process through, to be with, to hold the duality. Luckily, we have a new moon in Capricorn on the 30th. We have a new Gregorian year starting. And we're also headed into a Mars-Pluto opposition. So the rest of this year, that's on January 2nd. So the rest of this year is sticky. It's like asking for us to go within and unhook these programs and patterns so that we can move forward feeling more sovereign, more liberated, more autonomous, with awareness, agency, and power. But only we hold the keys. No one else does. Some tips and tools I love to give people as we navigate the holiday season: being around friends and family maybe we haven't seen in a while, or maybe it's just a very tender time for you. You have a lot of pain and wounding and trauma around the holidays. Just know that this time it can feel like your wiring is exposed. You can feel more tender, more sensitive to what's occurring around you. The subconscious doesn't necessarily acknowledge time, so we can be brought into old ways and old patternings pretty easily when the same situations arise, which means we also have the power to rewire it in real time. The first and foremost is to tend to your system proactively. I always say when I have clients going to see family or getting kind of pulled into old dynamics or frameworks, to proactively schedule time for yourself, to carve out time and space to simply be with your body, with what you're experiencing. This builds confidence between your inner child and your higher self. It creates more space to respond rather than react. And it creates more safety in your system as this connection point between your inner child and your higher self, your adult self, that really should be making the decisions rather than the inner child to decide how it wants to feel. Go into this time and space with boundaries. Communicate those boundaries clearly. Give direction. Oftentimes we expect people to read our minds and we don't even know we're doing it that way. But it's important that we take the reins of our lives. We step into our adult self and we set boundaries. We communicate those boundaries to those around us. And we also acknowledge when we are putting ourselves into situations where people might not be able to handle or respect those boundaries. And a way to navigate that is to have a boundary around how much time you're spending with that person, or whether or not you want to spend any time with them at all. But the goal is to build confidence in our higher adult self and our inner child so that our inner child can trust that our higher self and our adult self is running the show, is driving the car. That alone creates safety. And it's also maturation. It's taking the reins of our lives. It's moving from victim to victor. Another piece of this is respecting others' boundaries. So often we forget that it's not just about setting our own boundaries and having them respected, but we also, in turn, have to respect the boundaries of others. This is how we mature through these expansion periods, is by noticing, creating space, setting rituals and practices. They can be very small, very simple right now, but just certain things that you can do every single day that reorient you in space and time and provide a sense of safety within your system that you really need as you navigate these times. I do have 2 spaces left for private mentorship next year. So this is the last quarter I will be hosting mentorship in this way. If you've been wanting to do one-on-one work together, this container is transcendent. We go very deep together. We access some of the core layers that we need to access in order to grow and expand into the next chapter together. This is such a potent container, and I love working with clients in this way. It's really intimate. We're able to access some of the core pieces and parts that are holding you in past frameworks. So it's really a merging of all the different modalities I work with: quantum and intuitive healing, evolutionary astrology, somatic, integrative parts work, somatic attachment therapy, and trauma processing. And our goal together is really to establish a deepened connection to self, navigating the process of the integration of self, bringing all of your different parts forward and bringing back to your center so you can feel more whole, more integrated, more confident moving into this next chapter. Thank you, as always, so much for being here. I cherish and adore all of you. This has been such an incredible year. I'll have another episode, a year-end episode, kind of like recapping, but it's just, thinking back on 2024, it was one of the most difficult years, but also one of the most expansive and nutrient-dense years for me. So I just cherish all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing on Instagram, on social media, sharing with friends and family. It truly means the world. Also, if something lands for you or there's something you want to share, always feel free to email me. I love that so much. You can message me on Instagram. Email is usually a more direct way to get in touch, but I always love hearing how the episodes landed. I have my link for Pound Jewelry in the show notes, my link for the Loom Box. Pound Jewelry is near and dear to my heart. It's my dear friends who make the incredible adornment pieces that transcend space and time, that access the wisdom of the stones, the wisdom of the earth through these pieces that are intuitively created with love. I actually just received this incredible pearl necklace with a blue diamond and an Ouroboros, and I can't wait to show it to you guys because I love it so much. You can get 20% off with my discount code, Ali20. And the red light box that I use, which I love so much and has helped tremendously with my inflammation, recovery, and repair, is the Loom box. And I have a code for $300 off of that. It's incredibly easy to use. It's compact. It's highly effective. And it's also the most reasonable one I've come across. So I love this box. I love pound jewelry. I always say support small business during the holiday season. They need it so much. I'm sending you deep blessings of gratitude and love as you navigate this season. I'll talk to you next week.